It's actually, yeah, 30, 31.
Yeah, yes. You
Yes.
come in. We have a lovely upstairs and downstairs right here. Look at this pretty little decoration.
Kody Brown's face, according to one insider, looked like it could shatter glass the moment he learned the exact figure tied to that mortgage, $2 million. Not $2 million in assets, not $2 million in land value, $2 million in debt. The number allegedly slammed down on him in the form of loan documents that couldn't be spun, buried, or smoothed over. And that's when the fireworks began. Those close to the situation claim he went from tense silence to a full-on verbal storm in minutes, pacing, gesturing, and demanding to know who signed what and when. The sheer scale of the loan apparently blindsided him, and the fact that Christine, of all people, seemed utterly unshaken only added fuel to his fury. She reportedly sat back, arms crossed, a faint smirk curling at the corner of her mouth, as she delivered the line that would echo across every group chat in the Brown orbit. Math don't lie. If you believe the whispers, Christine had been tracking the family's property dealings long before this confrontation. She wasn't surprised by the loan. She was waiting for the moment Kody would have to face it without the usual layers of justification. The source insists she didn't even raise her voice, just calmly laid out the figures, one by one, letting the weight of them speak louder than any accusation. But Kody? He allegedly wasn't having it. Words like betrayal and setup reportedly flew out of his mouth. His frustration wasn't just at the money, it was at the optics. $2 million in debt meant questions from the rest of the family, from fans, and possibly from creditors. And the idea that Christine might be the one to leak those numbers, whether directly or through a convenient confidant, was driving him wild. The real sting? This wasn't just any property deal. It was one allegedly tied to Robyn's household, the so-called favorite wife home base, which meant every dollar in that loan could be painted as yet another case of the communal pot, serving one branch of the family tree, far more generously than the others. For Kody, that narrative was poison. For Christine, it was vindication, and while he was lashing out, she allegedly kept her eyes steady, her tone measured, and her message simple. The numbers are the numbers, no matter how loudly you yell at them. But if Kody thought the shock of the loan was the worst of it, he was in for a rude awakening, because those numbers were only the beginning of what Christine had lined up.
Here's the thing.
And this is the reason I wanted to go to Utah. Let me just say, I wanted to run, I wanted to change the law.
And the next revelation would make the $2 million look like the appetizer before the main course. Christine had always been painted as the emotional one, the one who reacted rather than planned, but those who really knew her say that couldn't be further from the truth. If anything, she had learned over decades in this family that patience was a sharper weapon than any outburst. Long before the day Kody's voice echoed over that $2 million figure, Christine had been quietly following the breadcrumbs. Not snooping, not scheming, just paying attention. And in a family this large, with finances crisscrossing like an overstuffed filing cabinet, paying attention meant noticing who was signing which checks, which bills were delayed, and which accounts mysteriously stayed full, even when everyone else was tightening their belts. Insiders allege she started her own little audit years ago, long before her split from Kody. It wasn't an official process. There were no accountants in suits, no legal discovery requests. It was simpler than that. She'd jot things down, keep printouts, snap photos of statements that crossed the kitchen counter. And yes, she listened when the kids talked about a new delivery to Robyn's house, or when someone mentioned a big payment cleared right before a holiday. Over time, those notes formed a story. And in Christine's version of events, the ending wasn't going to be kind to Kody or his fourth wife. According to one source, Christine's patience in this matter was almost unnerving. She never stormed into a room waving receipts. She'd just wait for the perfect moment. And that moment came when the mortgage records became too public to hide. A $2 million home loan in Robyn's name, with signatures allegedly linking back to shared family resources, was like a puzzle piece clicking into place.
But she's trying to assuage her guilt by saying, I'm a bad man. And I get it. She needs to do that so she can find another man who will trust her. Because if she leaves a good man, most guys are going to go, this is risky.
Christine didn't need to embellish. She simply had to put the loan amount next to the family's existing debts and watch the math speak for itself. Kody, of course, saw it differently. He reportedly told more than one family member that Christine was weaponizing the numbers to embarrass him. But from Christine's perspective, the embarrassment wasn't her doing. It was baked into the decision itself. Math don't lie, she had said. And she meant it. She wasn't pointing fingers out of spite. She was shining a flashlight into a corner she suspected had been dark for far too long. The Robyn connection only made things messier, because while every wife in the plural family had at some point benefited from the shared pot, there was a growing perception, especially among the older kids, that Robyn's household benefited more often and on a much larger scale. A lavish Christmas here, an unplanned shopping spree there, and now a $2 million loan. When Christine laid out her notes, the implication was obvious. The numbers weren't just random, they were a pattern. And here's where it got even more personal. Sources allege that Christine had documentation suggesting communal funds were used not only to service parts of that mortgage, but also to cover associated costs, things like property taxes, upgrades, and even a few luxury decor items. Nothing illegal, nothing that would draw in outside authorities, but enough to raise serious ethical questions about fairness within the family. And when you're dealing with a clan where every penny is supposed to be pooled for the good of all, ethical questions can be just as explosive as legal ones. So when Kody heard Christine bring up the $2 million figure, it wasn't just about the number. It was about the story that number told. A story in which his decision-making could be painted as reckless, self-serving, or both. And Christine knew exactly how to let that story simmer. What Kody didn't realize, though, was that Christine's math wasn't even the most damning part of her quiet investigation. She had something else, a piece of information so loaded that even the mention of it could turn the rest of the family against him, and she was about to drop it. If the $2 million loan was a grenade, Christine's next move was a stick of dynamite, and she'd been holding the match for years. The family meeting was already tense, with Kody pacing, arms crossed, and Robin doing that tight-lipped, wide-eyed thing she does when she feels cornered. But Christine's voice didn't rise. She stayed calm, almost gentle, like she was reading bedtime stories instead of dismantling the financial narrative Kody had been clinging to. She started with the word transfers. That got everyone's attention. In the Brown family, transfers was a vague term, one that covered everything from grocery money, moving between accounts, to serious chunks of cash, shifting for big purchases. Christine claimed she'd been tracking several of these over the past few years, none of them documented in the family's group discussions about budgets. Her tone stayed light, but each sentence felt like another brick stacking on Kody's chest. The room got colder when she said, PayPal. Not because of the platform itself, but because everyone knew PayPal was the perfect tool for moving money fast and quietly. Christine alleged that she'd traced nearly $500,000, $497,000 to be exact, moving through a PayPal account linked to a name not immediately recognizable to the family. That name, she said, was connected to a small LLC based in Flagstaff. Now here's where things got ugly. Christine claimed the LLC's official purpose was event coordination and household management services, but there were no public-facing events, no client lists, no visible operations. What there was, however, were purchases, everything from high-end furniture to private school tuition payments. And while Christine didn't outright accuse anyone in the room, her gaze flickered just long enough toward Robin to make the subtext scream louder than any accusation could. Kody broke first, his voice jumping an octave as he insisted this was irrelevant and misunderstood. But Christine didn't flinch. She laid out her notes like receipts on a kitchen table, explaining how she'd cross-referenced PayPal timestamps with delivery dates and expense spikes in Robin's household. The implication was clear. Communal money had been funneled into a private channel, one that primarily served one branch of the family tree. The kids in the room, especially the older ones, weren't subtle about their reactions. One of them muttered something about "Mom always said," and another rolled their eyes so hard you could practically hear it. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of whispered complaints finally given form.
This is like where you put pins on this. I'll show you where the pins are in just a minute. You put pins on this to show where you're from. Where you're from. Our home is fun in the sun. So everything in our home has to do with fun in the sun.
Robin tried to speak, her voice shaking, insisting that if any money moved, it was for family-approved purposes. But Christine's calm reply sliced through the defense. If it was approved, then why wasn't it discussed? That was the moment Kody's composure cracked entirely. He accused Christine of being vindictive, of trying to destroy him financially in the eyes of their children. But Christine didn't raise her voice once. She simply said, "You call it destruction. I call it transparency." And here's the kicker. Christine hinted that she had more, that this PayPal trail was only the middle layer of a much bigger financial cake. The top layer, she suggested, involved assets no one even knew existed, yet. Christine let the room simmer for a moment, letting the weight of her PayPal revelation hang in the air. Then she leaned forward, clasping her hands together in that way people do when they're about to tell you something that will change your whole understanding of the story. She said there was another layer, one she'd been hesitant to bring up because it was too outrageous without proof. But now she had the proof. She started with property records, public, searchable, undeniable. In her meticulous, almost methodical way, Christine explained how she'd been checking the county assessor's database, more out of habit at first, just to keep track of their shared land parcels. But then she started noticing names and entities tied to Kody and Robin that didn't appear on any of the family asset spreadsheets. She told them about a 3-bedroom vacation cabin in Sedona, purchased outright, no mortgage, under the name of a trust connected to one of Robin's relatives. The air got thick. Kody's jaw tightened, But Christine kept going. She alleged that the money trail from that PayPal account matched, within a week, the cashier's check used to secure that cabin. "It's funny how dates line up when you start paying attention," she said, her tone soft but her words sharp enough to cut glass. But she wasn't finished. Christine pulled out a thin, well-worn folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside, she said, were screenshots and printouts of invoices. Luxury items all shipped to a P.O. box in Flagstaff. We're talking designer handbags, high-end electronics, even a custom-made dining table that Christine claimed was worth more than some people's cars. All paid in full, and all allegedly routed through the same LLC she'd connected to Robin earlier.
I've been exiled from a state that I think as many people love me as hate me.
Robin immediately shook her head, saying the purchases were gifts or household investments, but Christine didn't let her off the hook. "Investments are for the family," she said, "not for one branch to enjoy while the rest of us make do." The kids shifted uncomfortably, and one of them asked outright if this was why there had been no money for the land payments a few years back. Kody barked that the two things were unrelated, but his voice cracked just enough to make you wonder if even he believed it. Christine then played her trump card, a blurry but unmistakable photo of Kody standing in front of what looked like a luxury SUV at a dealership, paperwork in hand. According to her, that SUV was registered not under his name, but under the same trust that owned the Sedona cabin. She alleged it was purchased within days of him telling the family they needed to tighten belts and pause any unnecessary spending. You could feel the temperature in the room drop again. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust. Years of public unity had been stripped away, and the image of the Browns as a cooperative, faith-driven family was crumbling right there at the kitchen table. Christine leaned back, almost smiling, and said, "If you think that's all, you're not ready for what's next." And with that, she hinted at something even bigger. Assets that weren't just hidden, but assets that might not technically be legal to hold in the way they were being held. Christine paused like someone deciding whether to open Pandora's box. She knew the next part would push the conversation from awkward into downright dangerous. But she'd also reached the point where keeping quiet felt like enabling. So she took a deep breath, tapped the folder again, and said, "We're not just talking about hidden property, we're talking about how that property's being hidden." She began explaining that over the years she'd gotten pretty savvy at reading incorporation filings and public business records. She claimed she'd discovered at least 3 LLCs created in the last 4 years, none of which were on the family's shared asset sheet. The first red flag, the managers listed on these filings were all people connected to Robin's extended family or longtime business associates, not Kody or Robin themselves. The second, the LLCs were registered in states with notoriously loose corporate disclosure laws. Christine leaned forward, her voice dropping as if the walls themselves might be listening. "One of them isn't even registered in the US, she alleged. "It's in Belize. You don't go offshore unless you're hiding something big or avoiding a whole lot of tax questions." The room went still. Belize. That wasn't the kind of thing you expected to hear at a casual family meeting, and yet here it was, sitting in the middle of the table like an unexploded grenade. Kody tried to wave it off, calling her paranoid, but Christine didn't flinch. She started pulling out papers that connected one of those LLCs to a series of transactions, large wire transfers in and out of the same bank account she'd linked to the PayPal funds. The amounts were big, 6 figures big, and always in neat rounded numbers, which she said was another red flag. People don't transfer exactly 100,000 unless they're trying to keep books pretty for someone, she added. Robin's face went pale. She muttered something about business opportunities and private investors, but Christine was already on to the next bombshell, 2 parcels of raw land purchased under the name of a shell company that, according to her, existed for less than a year before being dissolved. The kicker? The purchase dates lined up almost exactly with the sale of one of the family's old properties in Utah, a sale that Kody had said barely broke even. Christine's voice had that steady, measured cadence of someone who knows the more calmly they present something, the more damning it sounds. She wasn't ranting, she wasn't yelling, she was laying out numbers, dates, and entities like puzzle pieces falling into place, and every piece made the picture darker. Then came the line that made even the kids stop breathing. If half of what I'm seeing here is accurate, then not only was the money diverted, but it may have been moved in ways that could draw IRS attention. She clarified that she wasn't accusing anyone of a crime yet, but she was saying there were patterns here that would make an auditor salivate. Kody slammed his palm on the table, insisting this was all speculation and that she was trying to turn the kids against their father. But the damage was done. You could feel it. Whatever thin thread of trust had been left was fraying fast. Christine closed the folder, looked around the table, and said, "If you think the IRS is scary, wait until you hear what the state's been asking questions about." The air in the room felt heavier after Christine's last sentence. Even Kody, who'd been puffing himself up in full defensive mode, leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening like he was calculating something in real time. Christine let the silence stretch, just long enough for everyone to realize she wasn't bluffing, before she reached into the folder one more time and pulled out an envelope. "This," she said, sliding it toward the middle of the table, "isn't from the IRS. It's from the state of Arizona's Department of Revenue." Her tone was maddeningly calm, but her eyes were locked on Kody like she was watching for the slightest flicker of guilt. The envelope was unassuming, the kind of official white with a window where the address sat, but it might as well have been ticking. Robin reached for it first, but Christine's hand was faster. "You can read it later," she said. "For now, I'll summarize." She explained that the letter was a routine notice, or at least that's how it was framed, about discrepancies in reported income for a certain tax year. At first, Christine had thought it was a mistake, but then she looked at the year in question and realized it lined up almost perfectly with one of the large property sales and allegedly one of those mystery LLC transfers she'd mentioned earlier. Her voice dipped lower, forcing everyone to lean in. "The state doesn't send letters like this unless something in your paperwork triggered a flag, and they don't guess. They already have the numbers. They just want to see if you're going to tell the same story they already know." Kody crossed his arms, his face unreadable, but the faint twitch in his jaw gave him away. Robin jumped in, saying maybe it was some clerical error, that sometimes the wrong social security number gets attached to a form. Christine smirked, not out of malice, but with that knowing look of someone who'd seen too much to be brushed off. "If it's just a mistake, then you've got nothing to worry about," she said, leaning back. But the timing, well, math doesn't lie. She went on to say that a second letter had arrived about 2 months later, not addressed to Kody, but to one of the LLCs. And here's where it got stickier. The registered agent on that LLC was the same cousin of Robin's, who'd been listed on 2 other shell companies. "That's a pattern," Christine said flatly, and patterns like that make state investigators wonder why one family keeps popping up in the same circles of questionable paperwork. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. You could tell everyone was imagining what it would mean if the state decided to pull on this thread. Christine didn't have to say it out loud. Once they start digging, they don't stop at 1 year or one account. They go back year after year until they find what they're looking for. Kody tried to change the subject, talking about how the family had always been under a microscope and that outsiders never understand our structure. But Christine was done letting him steer. She leaned forward again and said, "If you think this is just about taxes, you're wrong. Because what I found next makes all of that look like pocket change." Christine didn't waste time with any warm-up. She reached into her folder one last time and slid out a thin stack of photocopied deeds and bank documents, each stamped with the same date in the corner. "I wasn't even looking for this," she said, tapping the papers. "I stumbled on it while checking the parcel numbers for the Coyote Pass properties. Turns out one of those numbers is linked to a separate holding, something the rest of us were never told about." Kody's brow furrowed, but he stayed quiet, as though waiting to see how much she really knew. Christine continued, her tone sharpening just enough to cut through the tension. "It's a property about 40 miles outside of Flagstaff acreage, not just a lot. And here's the kicker. It was purchased outright in cash, but the next day a $2 million loan was taken out against it." The room shifted. Even Mary, who had been holding herself carefully neutral, tilted her head slightly. Christine spread the pages across the table so the date stamps lined up. "Loan recorded in the county registry, the day after the purchase. Lender? Not a bank most people would recognize. Private equity out of Phoenix. They do short-term, high-interest loans, the kind people use when they don't want the scrutiny of a traditional mortgage." Robin spoke up immediately, her voice defensive. "That doesn't mean it's shady. Plenty of people use private loans to avoid bank red tape." Christine nodded, but her expression didn't soften. "Sure. But when you match the dates on these loan documents with the deposits I traced into the LLC account, yes, the same LLC we talked about earlier, it lines up to the exact day. And from there, chunks of that money start disappearing into separate payments. Not family bills, not property taxes, transfers, out of state." You could almost hear the mental math everyone was doing. $2 million is not the kind of sum you lose track of. And Christine, with that wry smile she's known for, delivered the line that hit hardest. "I know we like to say math don't lie, but when you borrow $2 million, someone has to explain where it went. Because the repayments alone would eat through more than the family's annual income." Kody finally leaned forward, his voice low but heated. "You don't know what those funds were for." Christine didn't flinch. "You're right. I don't know every detail, but what I do know is that none of us were told this property existed. None of us were consulted about the loan, and the repayments have been made using accounts tied to our shared assets. That means all of us are tied to it, whether we like it or not." Mary broke her silence then, asking the question that had been hanging in the air. "And what happens if whoever holds that loan decides they want their money faster than expected?" Christine gave a short, humorless laugh. Then they take the property, and if the collateral includes anything else in the LLC, they take that too. That's how these lenders work. They don't wait. They move in and clean out whatever they can touch. The tension was nearly unbearable now. The idea that a hidden $2 million loan could threaten not just one piece of property, but potentially other assets hit like a thunderclap. And Christine wasn't finished. She leaned back, letting the weight of it settle before adding, "I also found something in the lender's filings, something that ties them to a name I'm pretty sure you're not going to want to hear." Christine didn't rush. She let the silence stretch long enough for everyone to realize they were holding their breath. Then she slid one more page forward. The ink faint from scanning, but the letterhead still visible. The private equity firm's managing partner, a man named Glenn Harkness. The reaction was immediate. Mary blinked, her lips parting like she was about to speak but thought better of it. Kody's jaw tightened, a vein twitching in his temple. Even Robin's carefully rehearsed calm cracked just enough to reveal a flicker of something recognition, maybe even fear. Christine noticed it. Oh, so that name rings a bell? For those who didn't already know, Glenn Harkness wasn't some faceless investor. He'd made his money in commercial real estate, but his reputation came from something else entirely, being a fixer. The kind of man people called when they needed a deal pushed through that banks wouldn't touch, or when assets needed to be moved without drawing attention. He wasn't necessarily a criminal. No convictions, no official charges, but insiders whispered that his deals left trails no one wanted to follow. Christine's voice stayed level, but every word landed like a strike. Harkness is known for structuring loans in a way that lets him claim collateral from multiple entities, not just the one that took the loan. If he decides this property isn't enough to cover his investment, he can go after anything tied to the same LLC, including Kody Pass. Robin finally snapped. That's not going to happen. Glenn's a friend. He knows this is a long-term situation. Christine cut her off with a raised hand. A friend? That's interesting, because the loan documents list the borrower as R. Brown Holdings, LLC, not Kody Pass, LLC, not the family trust, just you. So maybe this isn't about the family's assets. Maybe it's about yours. The room chilled. If Robin had taken out the loan under her own entity but was still drawing repayments from accounts tied to the broader family, that wasn't just poor judgment. It was potentially devastating. Kody's voice rose an octave, frustration replacing his earlier composure. "You're making it sound like we're in bed with some mobster. This is business. Deals like this happen all the time." Christine tilted her head, almost pitying him. Sure, they happen all the time. And you know what else happens all the time? People lose everything when they assume a handshake deal will protect them from a lender who plays by their own rules. The others sat in a stunned hush, processing the reality that this wasn't just about a big loan or a hidden property. It was about who they were now tied to. Someone with a reputation for swooping in when borrowers stumbled and for walking away with far more than anyone planned to give. Christine closed the folder and slid it across the table toward Kody. "You can keep these copies. You're going to need them. Because if Harkness decides to call in that loan early, no amount of smiling for the cameras is going to save what's left." She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "And before you say I'm being dramatic, just remember, math doesn't lie, and neither do public records." The only sound after she left was the faint creak of the door swinging shut, and then in the quiet, Robin muttered just loud enough for Kody to hear, "I told you we shouldn't have involved him." The door had barely clicked shut behind Christine when Mary finally spoke. "We need a lawyer. Not next week, not tomorrow. Now." Her voice was low, but the urgency was unmistakable. Janelle nodded instantly, already reaching for her phone. "I've got someone who specializes in asset protection. I'm calling her before this gets any uglier." Kody bristled. "You're all acting like we've already lost. We haven't. This is just a misunderstanding that can be sorted out without dragging in outsiders." But the more he tried to project confidence, the more hollow it sounded. Even Robin's attempt at damage control came out brittle. "Glenn wouldn't put us in danger. He's invested in us, in our family's vision." Janelle shot her a look that could have stripped paint. "Invested in you, maybe. Don't confuse that with investing in us." She stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, muttering details to whoever was on the other end. Within minutes, the call had shifted from polite consultation to clipped, urgent questions. "Yes, that's the amount. No, it's not tied to the trust. Yes, there are repayments coming from multiple accounts. I know." Back in the room, Mary was scribbling names on a notepad. Loan officers, county clerks, anyone who might have handled or registered the paperwork. "We're going to need to pull everything. Deeds, liens, amendments. If Christine's right, we could be looking at cross-collateralization. That means the second this guy thinks Robin's property won't cover his money, he'll start circling everything else." Kody finally exploded. "You're feeding into her paranoia. Christine's been waiting for a chance to tear this family down, and you're all just handing her the matches." But his voice cracked on the last word, betraying what no one wanted to say out loud. He was scared too. Janelle re-entered, snapping her phone shut. We've got a meeting set for tomorrow morning. My lawyer says step 1 is freezing any transfers from shared accounts until we know exactly where the repayment money's coming from. Robin's eyes widened. You can't just freeze accounts we all use. Janelle didn't flinch. Watch me. Meanwhile, Mary was already drafting an email to a contact in the recorder's office, framing it as a routine records check to avoid tipping off anyone connected to Harkness. The plan was simple: get the documents, get the truth, then decide how much of this needed to stay behind closed doors. But even that felt like a gamble, because outside this tense little circle, rumors were already beginning to seep. A family friend had overheard part of Christine's reveal and texted someone else. By the time the meeting wrapped, 2 different sources had already contacted a tabloid stringer. If the story leaked before they had answers, they wouldn't just be fighting Harkness, they'd be fighting the court of public opinion. Robin tried one last push. We can still control the narrative if we move fast. We tell people this was a simple investment arrangement, nothing shady. But Mary cut her off sharply. No, you don't spin this until we know exactly what's on those documents. The truth has a way of showing up whether you invite it or not. The room went quiet again. For the first time in years, it wasn't just about who was right or wrong. It was about who would still be standing when the money trail finally stopped. By the next morning, it was already too late. The leak had hit overnight, and the tabloids wasted no time plastering it everywhere. The headlines were brutal. $850K family fund at risk? Mysterious loans link Brown clan to out-of-state developer. Even worse, the accompanying photos were candid, unflattering shots of Kody at a gas station, mid-scowl, as if the universe had been waiting for this exact moment to freeze him in time. When Kody saw the first headline on his phone, he went silent, unnervingly silent. No shouting, no bluster, just a long, drawn-out exhale. They think they've caught us red-handed, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But the us was telling, because for Christine, Janelle, and Mary, there was no us anymore. The collective shield that once protected the family's business dealings was gone. Christine, from her new place in Utah, took one look at the coverage and laughed. Not a gleeful laugh, but one of those I told you so laughs that somehow carried more sting than any insult. She posted a cryptic Instagram story, just a photo of her coffee mug with the caption, "Nothing like a little morning karma." Fans instantly connected the dots, flooding her comments with theories. Back at the table in Flagstaff, Janelle had already started triaging the damage. The story's going viral. My lawyer says we've got maybe 48 hours before creditors start calling with clarification questions. We have to be proactive. Robin looked panicked. Proactive? How? The numbers are out there. People are going to think the worst. They don't have to think it, Mary said flatly. They just have to see the pattern. This isn't our first financial mess, and the public's not going to give us the benefit of the doubt. The tension cracked when Kody slammed his phone onto the table. Enough with the doom and gloom. I'll handle the press. I'll make a statement. Janelle cut him off without raising her voice. No, you're the last person who should be talking right now. You'll make it worse. The way she said it, calm but immovable, carried more weight than if she'd shouted. Even Robin didn't argue. Then came the real blow. A well-known YouTube channel, one of those fan-run sleuth accounts, dropped a 20-minute breakdown of every known property purchase, sale, and transfer in the Brown family for the last 15 years. It was all public record, but seeing it laid out with dates, amounts, and cross-referenced screenshots made it impossible to ignore. The video racked up 500,000 views in 12 hours. By afternoon, the narrative had shifted from mysterious loan to pattern of shady deals. And once the online conversation tips in that direction, there's no pulling it back. Even the most loyal viewers were asking hard questions, and the family's silence only fueled the fire. In a rare moment of candor, Mary looked straight at Kody and said, "This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about trust, and you've burned through a lot of it." Kody didn't respond. For once, the man who always had a comeback sat there, staring at the headlines on his phone like they were the last nails in a coffin he didn't realize he'd been building. The silence was almost cinematic. You could feel it, the shift from a private crisis to a public reckoning. And deep down, they all knew there was no way to follow the money without following the truth, right to the doorstep of whoever was really responsible. So now the question isn't just whether the family can survive the hit, it's whether Kody can survive the story that's about to be told by people who aren't afraid to say the quiet part out loud. And that's where I'll leave it to you. Do you think Kody's facing a temporary storm he can charm his way out of? Or is this the moment his whole empire finally crumbles? Drop your thoughts below, don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep your eyes on the screen because you won't believe what's coming next.